Okay, so we're about to get into one of the most unbelievable, true survival stories you will ever hear. Seriously, it's a story that starts with a fall from the sky, turns into this brutal journey through the Amazon, and in the end, it shows you the razor-thin line between pure dumb luck and having the right knowledge. I want you to just imagine this for a second. You are falling, 10,000 feet. You're still strapped to your airplane seat, and you're just plummeting through a violent thunderstorm. You look down and all you can see is this endless sea of green jungle. It looks like a field of broccoli. The sound of the plane breaking apart is gone. Now it's just the howl of the wind.
It's a question that sounds completely hypothetical, right? Almost like a riddle. But for one person, this was a terrifying reality. And what's so fascinating isn't just that someone survived, it's how they did it. And maybe even more important, it's who she was. She was just 17. 17 years old, not some highly trained survivalist or a soldier, just a high school student named Julianne Kopka on her way home to celebrate Christmas. So after that fall, she wakes up. It's Christmas morning, 1971. She's still strapped into her seat, lying in the deep mud of the jungle floor. She's injured, she's completely disoriented, and she is totally, utterly alone. Search parties, by the way, had already given up. They just assumed there were no survivors. But for her, the real nightmare was actually just beginning.
So how in the world did this even happen? To get that, we have to rewind a little bit, back to the flight itself, and see exactly how a routine trip turned into an absolute catastrophe.
All right, so the date is December 24th, 1971. LANSA Flight 508 is about 40 minutes into its trip over Peru. Everything's fine, but as it starts to descend, the pilots make a decision that turns out to be fatal. Instead of flying around this massive storm system, they fly directly into it. At 21,000 feet, lightning strikes the right wing, and within seconds, the wing just tears off, the whole plane starts to break apart, and all 92 people on board just start falling.
And to understand why they'd fly into a storm like that, you have to know a little something about this airline. LANSA, well, they had a terrible reputation. It was so bad, in fact, that locals had this really dark joke. LANSA se lanza de panza, which basically means LANSA falls on its belly. Julianne's own father had begged her mother never to fly with them. But every other flight was booked solid for Christmas. They had no other choice.
And this right here just perfectly illustrates the problem. The plane itself was a Lockheed L-180 Electra. Now, this was an aircraft designed to fly over calm deserts. Its wings were really rigid, they weren't built to flex and handle the kind of severe turbulence you always get over the Andes Mountains. It was actually a plane that had already been taken out of service in the US for a very good reason.
So the big question, how did she survive the fall itself? I mean, it was this trifecta of almost impossible luck. First, these powerful updrafts from the storm actually pushed up against her, slowing her descent. Second, her whole row of seats started to spin, kind of like a helicopter blade or one of those maple seats, and that acted like a brake, slowing her fall even more. And finally, the incredibly dense canopy of the Amazon jungle acted like a natural, although very brutal, safety net.
But here's the thing. Surviving the fall was just the first impossible feat. Now she's alone, she's injured on the jungle floor, and luck was just not going to be enough anymore. This is where knowledge completely took over. You see, Julianne wasn't just any teenager. Her parents were famous zoologists who actually ran a research station deep in the Amazon. She basically grew up there. And in that moment of chaos and pain, she remembered this crucial piece of advice from her father. If you're ever lost in the jungle, find water and follow it. That one simple rule, it became her lifeline.
And so, this 11-day trek for survival began. It was a journey that would push the absolute limits of what a human being can endure. Just think about what she was dealing with as she started to walk. Her collarbone was broken, her knee was badly sprained, one of her eyes was swollen completely shut, and on top of that, she'd lost her glasses in the fall, so the world around her was just this green, blurry mess. And she had these deep, open gashes on her body, all just exposed to the humid, insect-filled air of the jungle. And food? Well, this was all she had. A small bag of candy she found in the wreckage. That's it. She rationed them so carefully because she knew they might be the only thing keeping her alive for days, or, for all she knew, weeks. The days just sort of blurred into this waking nightmare. On day 4, she finds something horrifying. Another row of seats with fellow passengers, all of whom had died on impact. By day 9, the last of the candy was gone, and she realized, to her horror, that her arm wound was now infested with dozens of maggots. But still, she kept moving. She kept following the water and eventually found a river large enough that she could just float in it, letting the current carry her weakened body. And then, on day 11, she saw it. A boat. This was it. This was the moment that could finally mean her ordeal was over. But the path from just finding that boat to her actual rescue, well, it was anything but simple. So the boat was empty, but there was a small path leading away from it. Using her absolute last ounce of strength, she followed it and found a small, empty hut. Inside, she found a can of gasoline. And she remembered another lesson her parents had taught her about parasites, and she did something that's just unimaginable. She poured the gasoline into her maggot-infested wound. It was excruciatingly painful, but it was a life-saving move to clean it out.
When the loggers who owned the hut came back hours later, they didn't see a teenage girl, they saw a ghost. She was covered in mud and blood, one eye swollen shut, the other a terrifying red from burst blood vessels. They literally thought she was a fearsome mythological spirit from their local folklore.
But then she managed to speak. In Spanish, she explained who she was. The men were just stunned. Of course, they'd heard the news reports about the crash. Everyone was dead. What they were seeing, it was impossible. And this is the moment where the relief of being found just crashes into heartbreak. Her entire 11-day journey, she held on to this one hope, that her mother, who was sitting right next to her on the plane, had somehow survived too. But the loggers confirmed the awful news. Of the 92 people on board Flight 508, she was the only one.
Julianne's story, as you can imagine, became a global phenomenon, a total miracle. But years later, a final haunting detail came to light, and it completely reframes the entire story.
Because for years, investigators were haunted by this one single question. Was she truly the only person to survive the initial impact with the ground?
The answer we now know was no. Investigations later revealed that as many as 14 other passengers had also survived the fall. They were injured, for sure, but they were alive on the jungle floor. And this, right here, is the ultimate haunting lesson of Julianne Koepke's story. The others survived the fall, but they stayed put. They waited for a rescue that was never going to come, and they perished there in the jungle. Julianne also survived the fall, but she didn't wait. She used her unique knowledge, that advice from her father, to create her own rescue. So in the end, it wasn't just the miracle of the fall that saved her life. It was the decision to get up and walk.